So one of the things we talk about in this chapter is that there's different types of relationship management that exist within PR. That parts of PR, to a large degree, is about relationship management. That the idea here is that you are about trying to maintain, relationships with the media, with government agencies, with consumers, with workers, workers to workers, different departments, business to business, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of different relationships that exist within a business. Business, oftentimes, kind of talking about business to business relationships. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the movie The Informant, but in the movie The Informant, one of the things they talk about is it's a movie about ADM in Decatur, Illinois, and ADM is a large supplier. They make things like high fructose corn syrup, things like that. They're a big ag supplier. But one of the things that ADM makes is it makes additives for food, and one of them was lysine. And they had a guy who was an engineer for that, and he basically he was having some problems with the production, and so he started making up this long story about there was espionage in the company, and he started trying to cover it up. At the same time, he started stealing from the company. It's kind of an elaborate story about kind of the craziness. Anyway, they made a Matt Damon a movie about this. Well, in that movie, it's kind of crazy. It wasn't a really popular movie because I don't think that Steven Soderbergh, who made the movie, connected everything quite as well as I think they had envisioned it. And so the movie kind of it's kind of a sleeper of a movie. It's not as big as it could have been. I definitely have enjoyed it because it was shot in Decatur, where I worked and lived for years. But the idea there is one of the things about this movie is the guy who did it. The whole point of the movie was it was about the ADM ended up being found out for corruption. And what they ended up doing was they would work with other suppliers of lysine and other suppliers of ag, like corn syrup, and they would go to all these other companies that did it, and they would agree to fix the prices for the companies that wanted to buy it. And they would all agree to sell at the same price, which is illegal. Because you can't fix prices together to say, well, let's all try to make X number of dollars, so we'll all set a price at this. In the United States, that's illegal. It's price fixing. And so what happened is in that thing, I guess it came out that ADM used to say their rule was that that your competitors are your friends and your suppliers are your enemies. That they kind of came up with this view that the people who sold them the raw products could gouge them. But if they could be friends with the people who sold the end product, they could all unite and demand prices together and sell them at a certain price, and they could actually be better off. And so one of the things is they basically kind of created an idea that we are going to only worry about the relationship with the people who are doing the same thing as us in order to screw over everybody who does business with us and everybody who buys from us, as well as everybody who supplies us. And so that became kind of their model, and it worked for years. And supposedly they're still in business and still doing quite well. I don't know if they've gone back to that model or not, but they lost a huge government lawsuit over the matter. They ended up having to pay one of the biggest fines in history at the time for their role in this. But the idea there is those are all different relationships. There's relationships not only with your consumer, but there's relationships with other businesses. There's all kinds of suppliers and things that we don't even realize. IT, technology, security companies, and other things that they have relationships. And PR's job is to maintain a positive view towards all of those. So when you get into PR, you'll realize that it's not just that. It's also our business relationships. It's also our customer relationships. It's also government relationships. There's lobbying, trying to get influence on government, but there's also what we call government relations, and there's also what we call like lawmaker or legislative relations. And those are all part of it. Lobbying is part of legislative relations, but government relations might be trying to be friendly with the people who come in and regulate the company, not the lawmakers who make the laws, but rather the people who come in and enforce the laws. And so all of these are different relationships you must maintain. You need investor relationships, you need issue-driven relationships, and there's all different types of relationships that come about. The one thing I want to talk specifically about today, though, is about media relationships. A lot of people who go into PR end up coming from a background in the news media. We see that Parker and Leeds, some of the early people, and a lot of other people in public relations began out in the media. And why is it that that works? Well, there's a few reasons. One is people who go into news oftentimes are very interested in, they're very devoted to deadlines, and they're very task-oriented, things like that. And those are all good skills to have. They also are very well trained to focus on, being truthful and being accurate and getting the story straight. And so when you focus on those things as a PR person, your credibility with all your audiences is going to depend upon the fact that they can trust you. And they'll trust you if you're honest, straightforward, and factual. It may not be what wins the day every day, but in the long run, it's slow and steady wins the race, and honesty wins the race in the long run. But the other thing is they also know a lot about storytelling. If you want people to pay attention to what you're doing, you've got to tell stories. You've got to tell your information in ways that people want to hear it. If you are producing a product that is, suppose you make a product that makes it cook 10 times faster than, your food 10 times faster. You've created the microwave, right? It's a great product. It's well regarded, but a microwave maybe costs, at least initially when they made, probably cost several $100s, if not more. So if I say, wow, this is a great product, it'll cook your food 3 times faster, it's great. You can take things like the air fryer. That's maybe a more conventional or modern one. I have an air fryer. It's absolutely great. It cooks the food fairly quickly, maybe a little bit quicker than a conventional oven, but not much. But the food is extremely crispy and very juicy, just like it was deep fried. But it doesn't have any of the deep fried cholesterol or other things. And so that's very positive. Now, I tell you those things, but those aren't nearly as compelling as talking about somebody who's exhausted from work and they come home and they're able to throw something in the microwave and make it quickly. Somebody who's been struggling with their weight, who is, really has a hankering for French fries every once in a while, but they can never get them healthy. And now they can cut potatoes and put them in the air fryer and have a healthier version of French fries to satisfy that craving, while not just going off their diet feeling like a failure and quitting, right? And so when you tell these stories, that is what can connect with your audience, with your publics. And journalists are trained in that. They learn how to find those stories, how to find those things that connect, and they do it. They also have a tendency to be aware of the concept of newsworthiness. Newsworthiness is kind of one of these things that has to do with a story being timely, being close by, proximity matters, has human interest, has relevance, and has sometimes also conflict, human conflict, other things like that. So times when there's, it's relevant to the time, it's close by, it has human interest, it has relevance, maybe there's a conflict, other things in there. All those are things that make things newsworthy. And journalists tend to know that. And so if you're a company and you want to get your message out, having somebody who knows what journalists are looking for stories, that you can relate well to the journalists. That when something comes up that is an issue, say for example, right now, as I'm making this video, we're in the middle of about to have an inauguration. I'm making this right before the inauguration. And so if you have somebody who's an expert on history or an expert on something related to that, or an expert on security, you could go out to the media and say, hey, I got a story about a guy who actually was at this inauguration and can tell you that, one of my employees. And so once they get some mention of the fact that the person works for your company and does security, and they also work security at the 1980 inauguration. Well, there's a good story, and it connects somebody local. It's timely. It has human interest, and it also brings attention to your company. And so by having people who know that, they're able to do what they call pitching. They can take these stories and pitch them over to the media. And so that's a lot of times what they do is, so they'll pitch stories, they know what's newsworthy, and they're able to do it. The other thing about PR people when they deal with the media is they have to be able to empathize with the reporters. They need to realize reporters are on deadline, that reporters, get pitched ideas all the time. You have to be nice, and you have to be helpful. So one of the things is they always say, empathize with the reporter, try to find things that you think are going to be helpful. Because I run the student newspaper here at Lincoln Land, I get about 4 or 5 emails a day from PR people pitching different things that they think I might find interesting for my student newspaper to do. And sometimes I read them and I think, wow, that's actually really great. And I will call the person and say, hey, I'm sending a reporter your way to give you a call. And sometimes it's really cool. And a lot of times it's not. But that's a case where somebody who has a background is able to realize what a media person needs and is able to kind of work with them and understand what they need. The other thing is make yourself useful. That what happens is even if it doesn't have anything to do with your company, even if it doesn't have anything to do with it, you're trying to build a relationship with these people. And the best way to build a relationship is to make yourself useful, is to make yourself where they go, well, this person was really helpful. I'll give you a quick story about this. One time when I was working at the newspaper in Peoria, Illinois, I got sent out to do a story about the election. There was a transition of presidents. It was actually George Bush got reelected, George W. Bush, and John Kerry lost. And so they were like, well, go out and get a man on the street, find out what people are thinking about this. So I go out I'm just kind of going around town, I'm talking to people, and I'm having a hard time finding people. So I went to like a couple different places, and I was like, went to the mall, and the mall's like, we don't want you here, leave. They kicked me out. So I went to all these places, but somebody's told me along the way, they said, maybe the hospital would be a really good place because people are just sitting in waiting rooms. So I said, okay, maybe I'll check out the hospital. So I go to the hospital, and I got there, and they send down the PR person because I asked, for permission to go into the hospital before I did it. And the PR person came down. And the reason why I was going to hospital and not just walking around parks is because it was like 5 below 0 that day. And so it was extremely cold and nobody was outside. And so I was just kind of looking for somebody who would be able to, give me a quote about what they thought, find places where people were gathering. And the guy came down and he said, look, you can't interview people in the hospital. We don't know. Some of these people may have had a family member who just died. They may have just gotten a cancer diagnosis. I said, we don't want you here. It's just, it would be really kind of rude to our patients for you to be here, interviewing them. We'd just rather kind of be a little bit more respectful than that. And so we'd rather you not be here. I said, okay, I understand. I guess I hadn't thought about that. I was young and didn't think about the fact that that could be a problem. But the guy sat there for about 3 or 4 minutes saying, well, have you tried this place? Oh, that place usually has people gathering, and he was really, really, really helpful. And I ended up figuring out the story. I ended up deciding that was the last place I was going to go. And I called a couple of people I had contacts in my Rolodex, and I just called them and got their impression of the election that were kind of politically interested. At that point, I was really just looking for people I was just looking for like 1 or 2 more Republicans in order to balance out the piece. And so I called some Republicans I had met while covering other stories. But the case is that he was so helpful that he basically left me with a positive thing. And that's the thing, is like, now I know that this guy is going to be helpful and go out of his way to help me, and I'm going to go out of the way to help him when I can. And that's sort of the way that you're trying to do. You're trying to build those kinds of relationships so that when he calls me to pitch a story and he says, I got a story idea, I can remember that guy was super nice to me, and he was concerned about me being able to do my job on something that made absolutely 0 difference to him. He was willing to take 2 minutes out of his day and help me, 5 minutes out of his day and help me, was super polite, and I'm going to go out of my way to help him. And that's kind of what you want to do. It's about building relationships. And that goes across the board. You're going to deal mainly with media, social media, things like that. And so you want to focus on those things and building those relationships, but it also works in everywhere, that those kinds of just doing that makes a big difference. So, all right.